everybody, and welcome to episode 60 of On the Road with AutoTrader, where we make car stuff simple for Canadians. My name is Jody Lai, and I'm the editor-in-chief of AutoTrader.
And my name is Dan Alika, and I am AutoTrader's road test editor, and I appreciate that little flourish for 60. It was like a nice little, putting a pin
I mean,
in it.
60 is a big deal. We're
that
almost at 100.
Basically your mental and emotional age, 60.
I would say, yes, mental, emotional, physical age.
For those of you who don't know, Jody is our resident senior citizen, not by actual birth age, but by everything she does.
I'm an old soul.
Yeah, that's very true.
I was just talking to our friend Craig Cole yesterday about how much I would like to retire.
Yeah, there you go. See? You're well, and maybe that's a good segue into this episode because just like you, we're about to talk about some future classics.
Yes.
Only this is about cars.
Yeah, so we like to talk about what cars we think will become future classics. And we're going to limit it to cars that are on sale today, just because if we expanded that, this episode would go on for like 13 hours.
Oh my God, it would be endless.
And so once in a while, we get to drive something that like we feel is super special, and deserves to be, put into that future classic category.
Yeah.
So we've tried to be a little bit picky, but before we get going, I do want to talk about like what qualities are we looking for that would make a future classic car?
I think, the obvious one is performance, right? That is just like the big, there are, don't get me wrong, there are classic cars out there that aren't performance cars. There are classic cars that are, premium and whatever. But for the most part, when you think of current classics, so not just future ones, but ones that have, that were sold 50 years ago and they're appreciated today, is performance vehicles, right?
Yep, typically. I would say some level of rarity is super important. Like either if it was like a limited run or a special edition or something like that.
But see, I was going to say that doesn't always, that is one of those things where it's like just because you build it doesn't mean they'll come. Like I agree that it helps because often there are more. But okay, here's a good example. Subaru BRZ TS. Not really a future classic.
Yeah.
Right? But the, WRX STI Type RA or the what was the last one? The 309, I think, was the STI 309. That was like those ones were legitimate because they did have significant performance upgrades.
Yeah.
They represented like the pinnacle of that model's capabilities. I think that's what you're seeing on this list when we go through it is like there's just something that sets these ones apart from the rest of the pack that makes them so special. Because there are also vehicles that like, the one that I talk about a lot is the Toyota Crown Signia. I love it. It's one of the best vehicles I've ever driven.
Right.
It's easily the best this year. I described it as the best vehicle under $100,000.
But there's no way it would be a classic car.
But it's not a future classic.
For
so
sure.
Greatness doesn't necessarily mean classic, and rarity doesn't mean classic. It's this weird culmination of the two.
Yeah, I think so as well. And like if we look at, Dodge, Challenger, and Charger, when they, the last call models, they had like 1 million of them.
Yeah.
And so I think they kind of like defeated themselves by coming up with so many because I feel like there's too much volume now. They can't be classics.
That was last call with unlimited talk and text, okay? That was it never ended. It was literally, guys, this is the last call except until the next call.
Yeah.
But then it's going to be the last call. Oh, but there's another call coming through.
This is the last call.
Hello, who's calling? Oh, it's Dodge again with another Challenger. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, they were kind of ridiculous with that.
They ruined the idea of the rarity and the collectability of those cars.
I think so too. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is that like we're at a really pivotal point in our industry now where, electrification is going to become more mainstream. That means that there's a lot of really cool stuff that's being discontinued. And I feel like whenever there's a last of something, I feel like that kind of sets it up sometimes to be a future classic.
Sure, yeah. But I thought about that. Not a Dodge. Other than Dodge, but I thought about that recently with the Volkswagen Golf R and the GTI. This is the last year you're going to be able to get those with manual transmissions.
Right.
But there hasn't been, at least from what I can tell, there hasn't been this like mad rush, and maybe it's just poor timing, because those are cars that they're great and they're affordable, but kind of given the economic climate of the last year, interest rates being high, that's not a frivolous purchase for someone. Usually it's a car that somebody's buying to be their daily driver. Whereas, these more expensive, like 6-figure cars, that's a second, third, fourth, fifth vehicle
Right.
for someone. So they can more likely afford those, end of run vehicles. Because I don't think there's this big run on getting that GTI, that Golf R with the manual for the last time. It's like people have kind of bought them already. The ones that wanted them bought one. There are shortcomings on this new version that has kept people from upgrading, I think, from like the previous gen.
Right.
So again, it's like, there's more to it. It's one of those things when you see it, you know it, or when you experience it, you know it. But yeah, I think it's got to be this kind of like duality of like greatness and exclusivity. That's my theory.
Exclusivity is a big one.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the ones we picked kind of meet all of those, all that stuff we laid out.
Now, this list is interesting because a couple of these I had, suggested and you were like, yep, totally. Some of these are your contributions. And I think like we're mostly in alignment, but some of them I find interesting.
Same here. Some of the ones you threw out, I was like, I don't think so. But you had a good argument for them, so I wanted to include them.
But the one that I actually want to kick off with, because you talked about with electrification coming and all this stuff, the Hyundai Ioniq 5N.
That's a good one. That's interesting to me because there's no electric classic cars yet. Like there's none in existence, right?
I think, but given the uncertainty, given the sort of like, drop in interest in EVs, and like I talked about in my review, which we'll put links to all of these in if you're watching on YouTube, the description will have links to these. But I talked about it in my review that like the performance is unquestioned, but it's also this like uncharted territory of what the future of performance looks like. So whether or not the Ioniq 5N is it will dictate that kind of collectability, right? Because it could be this like one-time deal that was like, wow, this was almost the path we went down.
Right.
So that's going to make it rare and collectible, or it's going to be, this is the car that really kicked off electric performance.
Right.
And I don't want to hear from any Tesla owners that say, no, the Model S Plaid or whatever, like straight line performance. I'm talking about pure, like well-rounded factory performance. None of this
looks sick.
It does look really. I saw one in the wild yesterday. They are so exceedingly rare in Canada right now.
Well, that's what I mean, is because there's not a lot of people buying them, which means that, one day down the road, let's say like 25 years down the road, there's not going to be a lot of them out there.
Exactly. And part of it is, like I had a pretty candid discussion about it with Don Romano and some of the other execs at Hyundai Canada. And, this idea that like it was an important vehicle for Hyundai to bring, but it's also a tough sell. Right.
Of course, especially the timing right now.
Well, but this was before when interest was still like at a decent. But his point was that it's expensive. It's a hard sell in terms of like convincing somebody that's spending whatever 70 grand on I still say it's a hatchback, but like a hot hatch, right? Yeah. That again is sort of unproven and whatever, but it's got the bona fides to be a performance vehicle. It runs, pretty quick lap times at the Nürburgring. It does so much so intelligently. Like a lot of engineering resources went into this vehicle, but it's hard to sell it here. Whereas in Asia and Europe, where the prices are a little bit lower because they have volume in their favor, right?
Right.
So, but yeah, going back to the performance thing is like, yeah, the Mustang Mach-E GT Performance Edition, but it feels like the Mustang GT in the sense that it's like, yeah, it's a performance car, but it's really like kind of good at a couple things, right? The Model S and Model X Plaids, same thing. It's just about big numbers and super quick acceleration, but like the brakes on those things are garbage.
Yeah, because nothing else has been upgraded to match the output.
And then when Tesla claimed that, the one that they ran around the Nürburgring, it's going to be factory. And then it was like, the tires are different, the wheels are different. There were all kinds of upgrades. And it's like, whereas the Ioniq 5N that ran the Nürburgring was a production vehicle. There was nothing about it that was modified.
Yeah, and I gotta give Hyundai props for kind of being the first to pioneer this type of vehicle. And this is Hyundai. Like, you think that, someone more well-known for performance would have been the first, like a BMW or something, right? I mean, you have the Porsche Taycan Turbo, but I think that's so unattainable for most people that I don't even count it in a lot of these things.
And those Turbo and Turbo S in Porsche lore, it's really like, it's a crazy performance vehicle, but it's also like, it's a GT car, right? It's a Grand Tourer. It just so happens to, be able to do over 300 kilometers an hour and all that stuff. Yeah, like the Ioniq 5N is attainable. Yeah, not kind of every day, not the average person.
Yeah, but you
it
don't
is
have to be like a millionaire to own one.
Exactly. So that I just wanted to kick off with that because it's kind of unique on this list. The rest of that's the only one on here that's electrified, let alone all electric.
Full electric.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of people are gonna roast us in the comments about like, oh, well, what about electric car reliability? Like, is that thing just going to be a brick in a couple years? And like, I just want to say all of that we don't know yet, and it's probably going to be fine.
And obviously I can't vouch for every EV, but I can't vouch for every gas powered vehicle either.
That's exactly it.
So
any classic car is a commitment to the lifestyle, knowing that things might go wrong. And you're going to have to fix them. That's just how classic cars work.
It's also speculation, right?
Of
Everything.
course.
That's what, you have these like prospectors. That's what they're doing. They're looking at vehicles and betting, if I buy this and immediately put a cover on it in a garage somewhere, it's going to be worth something, which I don't agree with. I like to see cars driven. I hate to sound like that typical, gearhead of
but it's true.
But it's true, right? And that to me makes those barn finds and whatnot, all that much more special. Because it's like somebody, just kind of forgot about this, but it's got some kilometers on the odometer and it was clearly driven versus some collector who's got a garage filled with cars that they're hoping are worth a bunch of money.
And I mean, I think that happens a lot. And I'll start talking about the Porsche 911 Dakar right now, because I think a lot of those got scooped up. Same thing with almost any other 911 that is like a very special edition, like the 911 R. It was like sold out instantly. And they got word that like most of the people who bought one just put it in a garage.
Yeah.
And the people at Porsche were like really upset. They were like, I wish people would just buy them and drive them because that's what they were built for.
That's a whole other debate. Obviously, Porsche's entire business was built on this rarity and this exclusivity. And then when people take it to that, you can't control that, right? Once you create that monster, you can't put it back in the box.
Well, when you look at the prices that the last air-cooled 911s are going for, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking $500,000 for one of these things, right? And like when people see prices like that, you get like a hoarding mentality, right? Where you're like, okay, well, I got to protect my investment, which I understand, but like most cars are depreciating assets, right?
Yeah.
And I think for these, like for a 911 Dakar to hit that classic car status, I feel like if it had some life on it, people would appreciate it more. Like if it's been driven,
totally.
If it's been through a rally, it has that provenance and that history.
Yeah.
I feel like that only kind of sometimes adds to its value.
Totally.
Not all the time, but sometimes.
But yeah, and it's also like we've talked about this a lot. We've talked about it with Barish, who's a big car guy. So for those of you who've listened to the show, we've had him on. He's our VP of Insights and Intelligence at Trader. He's a big car guy, has a Porsche Boxster, but also has a family. And so it's like now he's dreaming about what's next. And we talked about it, whereas like, what is next as a Porsche fan? Like, let's say that you're a Honda fan, right? And you can say, well, I didn't get my hands on a DC2 Integra, but this new, Type R or this new Integra Type S, that's attainable and I can sort of fulfill that dream that I missed out on. With Porsche, that doesn't.
Everything is so expensive.
Exactly.
Yeah, everything.
And it's really unfortunate that that's, the way, and I understand it's this prestigious brand and whatnot, but I just hate to see that it's created this like unobtainable status.
I mean, it's a little bit sad for me because obviously, like, the 911 is like my ultimate dream car, right? And I've kind of come to the crashing realization that, like, I will probably never be able to afford one, new or used, right?
Because they're outrageous.
So now I'm starting to think, okay, well, if a 911 isn't attainable for me, what are my options? Even like, you know, that 968 I was driving, or 964 or whatever. There were 5 of them on AutoTrader. They were all under 40 grand, which, okay, that's like pretty attainable, but it's like so far away from what I want. I feel like, would I be settling if I got one
Absolutely
of those?
you
I
would.
think so too, right?
It's like, I don't know. I understand where you're coming from. It's just like, to me, you know, that's the unfortunate reality. Like, I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to buy a, you know, quite frankly, like a not very good car just to own.
Just to get the badge.
A Porsche, exactly.
Right? And so I was having that crisis. But the 911 Dakar was so cool, and I think it's going to be a future classic because, A, very limited production. There was like 2,500 of them.
Yeah.
It's what I like to call like double vintage. When it's a classic 20, 25 years from now, you know, it's obviously a callback to the Dakar race car of the 80s, right? And so I love when things are double vintage,
You would.
if that makes sense.
You would.
And it's cool as hell. Like, it's bad to the bone.
Next on the list, BMW M3 CS is a super cool car. The CS actually stands for collectible status. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Could you imagine?
But no, so it stands for competition sport. It basically is a BMW M3 competition just made better. It's lighter.
Question for you.
Yeah.
I agree that this will be a future classic because it is very limited and it's cool and it's like very performance hardcore.
Yeah.
But do you think if it came with a manual, it would be even more collectible? Or do you think with the automatic, it'll still be pretty
I
hyped
don't
up?
know. I mean, that's a really hard, like, who's to say, right? Sure. You know, are the people that can afford this or you know, have the kind of like connections at a BMW dealer to even get their hands on one, do they care enough? And ultimately, like, those are the ones that it matters to, right?
Right.
If you have 160 grand to spend on a car before tax, you know, my thought is like, if enough, BMW is one of those brands that it listens to its customers, right? And if there was enough demand, I feel like that car. Now, granted, part of it comes down to, you know, torque and what that manual transmission is capable of, you know, controlling. And there's just too much of it. That's very much the case here. That's the case with the Volkswagen Golf R. The manual version makes less torque than the automatic because that 6-speed was maxed out. So that's more than likely the case here. But the car is just good and it's so well rounded that to me the transmission is such a like small piece to the entire puzzle.
And I think what you said about the M3 CS, where like it's a terrible daily driver, but I think people don't buy classic cars to be daily drivers. So I think that's actually totally okay in this case.
Yeah, it's like, you know, because it's very purpose built.
Yeah.
And this is one of those cars. Yeah, you're not going to see one with, you know, 200,000 kilometers on the odometer and whatever, but you're going to know that if there's only, you know, 5,000 kilometers, that they were likely hard driven on a track somewhere. And again, like you said, I think that adds some value to the vehicle. So that one, and then in a similar vein in terms of like execution, the Cadillac CT5V Blackwing.
Also another one of your all-time favorites.
Such a good car.
Yeah, it was fabulous. And it's also like, I don't see very many of them around.
No.
They don't sell very many of them, so that does have that rarity.
Yeah.
But also the combination of being a supercharged V8, manual transmission, rear-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Like that combination, it's so hard to find, almost impossible.
And that one was actually, I remember, you know, and this maybe goes to your point about the M3 CS. I remember when that car was announced and the pre-orders, it was some crazy number, like 70% of the pre-orders were manual, not automatic, which is cool. But yeah, it's just like, again, the execution is so impressive that it's, to me, is the totality of all of those factors, right?
Yeah, I think so too. And when when you see something like a C8 Corvette, I don't think that's going to be a future classic.
No.
I don't know, because there's so many of them. Like you see them everywhere, right? And so I think this one is just a little bit more special, a little bit more exclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bonkers cars, right? Something that's
Bonkers
weird.
cars.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something that's like, I can't believe they did that
Yeah.
in, in this era or whatever the case may be. Becomes that helps the case for, for it to be a future classic, as you go, wow, like Cadillac didn't have to build that thing.
Yep.
And the cool thing to me, more so than BMW with the M3 CS, is like, it's not about the like, it's not a prove it point. It's not like, oh, we're doing it because if you ask the average Cadillac driver, Cadillac owner, I bet you they don't even know about the C250
No, they drive
Blackwing.
like Escalades and stuff.
Escalades, XT4s,
Yeah.
just these run of the mill that are so disconnected from this performance. And yeah, Cadillac has talked about its performance, like its racing heritage. And don't get me wrong, like the Cadillac racing program now is still successful and whatever, but it's like, this wasn't a car like the Ioniq 5N or like the N Division in general that it's like Hyundai felt the need, or now with Genesis launching its
Right.
Magma Performance division.
They got something to prove.
Exactly. Cadillac didn't have to do this. It just went, oh, let's do it.
Yeah. We're
And-
doing this because we can
And I
we
think
want to.
and I think that's going to help the collectability.
I love that. In a kind of similar but very different vein at the same time is the Acura Integra Type S that we had mentioned. I loved it when I drove it to the point where I was like, should I buy one? Because it's exactly what I wanted in a car, right? And I also think that combination of, they probably won't do another manual transmission car. This
Yeah.
is probably the last one that they're ever going to make, period.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it very special. But it also felt very special. I felt very
Yeah.
connected to the car. It was great to drive. But you could also daily drive it if you wanted to. It was like perfectly good at doing both.
I suppose to like I don't know, my gut wants to say that the current Civic Type R would be like my vote of the two to be like my vote for which one of them is
because
the
it's
future
more
classic.
bonkers.
But to your point, this is the first Integra Type S that has existed in years.
Yep.
The fact that it's manual, the fact that it is a Civic Type R just with a different skin. Because the Civic Type R, there was a generation before this that launched in 2016 or whatever
Right.
it was. And then that, kind of cascaded into this current generation, whereas there wasn't a predecessor to this Integra Type S, and there probably won't be a successor to this Integra Type S. So it makes that, that window that much smaller.
It's like a single generation special,
Yeah.
and then that's it, right?
Exactly.
Especially from Acura, because they haven't really had anything that fun
No
in a long
bangers?
time. No bangers, yeah, nothing bonkers, and even this is not like truly as bonkers as the other ones that we've mentioned on this list.
Yeah. Now, guys, keep in mind, like obviously the NSX is bonkers, but it's also very like, it's so refined. Like the cool thing about a car like the Integra Type S is it does things that it shouldn't. Like the NSX is everything that, like it meets every expectation, no matter how sky high they are. With the Integra Type S, it's like stuff like it should torque steer like crazy because it's putting all that torque to
But
the
it
front wheels,
doesn't.
but it doesn't. It's so balanced. So that's what we mean when we talk
Yeah.
about it being bonkers.
But also it has like a really scrappy personality.
Yeah.
Like it had tons of personality, which and I've driven the NSX before, and honestly, it was fine.
Yeah, it's a little
to me, it didn't
sterile.
have a lot of personality.
Yeah, it's sterile while also being really impressive.
Yes,
like not to take
absolutely.
anything away from it,
Yes.
but it's definitely like predictable and whatever. Another one on the list, the Ford Mustang Dark Horse, which is kind of similar in execution to the M3 CS. It's a very purpose built. It's really meant for the track. It's like uncomfortable. It's loud. Driving it around on the street is like not all that satisfying. And then you get it out onto a racetrack and it's just like
when it counts,
an animal.
it sings.
Yeah. Expensive, but cool.
And I also think this generation of Mustang, I feel like they haven't had that many special editions yet.
They will, surely.
Yeah?
They have to.
I mean, and then is the question about like how much longer is like a gas powered manual V8 Mustang going to be around, right?
Yeah. It's really like that's one of those things. It's the end of an era, but then again, to your point, is like this is the problem, right? When I look at a Mustang, as cool as the Dark Horse is, there are just so many
I
Mustangs out on
know.
the road. On one hand, it's great. It's like the Mazda MX-5. Awesome car, not a future classic. And even like if you look at the NA Miata, which I used to own one, I
Mhm.
loved it. It's like, yeah, it is a classic, but even at that time, aside from, people who had driven it and experienced it, it wasn't a car that you lusted after.
No,
It,
because people made fun of you for
a little
driving
bit,
one.
yeah. And it's
Yeah.
like kind of with the Mustang, not that people make fun of you, but it's just like, oh, like the Challenger, it's like, oh, another Mustang.
It's like an easy choice, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
So that it does kind of take away from the specialness of the Dark Horse, in my opinion.
Yeah. I
And I
mean,
know
like,
our friend Dustin Woods would not be happy because he's owned multiple Mustangs.
right.
I used to call him Dustang.
That's good. That's good.
He's such a Mustang fan. It's a great car. It's capable of a lot, but yeah, I do think it sort of dilutes the specialness a little bit when you
Right.
have everything from like what I used to call like the real estate agent special to like this track weapon.
Right.
But at a distance, you can't tell it apart, and maybe that is what makes it special.
I mean, what about like something like and I mean, this isn't on sale today, but something like a Shelby or like a GT 350.
Yeah, again, like they're-
I think those ones will be future collectibles.
Sure. I mean, as soon as you put a Shelby badge on anything,
Right?
right? It's
But it
like,
was so good.
but it's, that is very,
I
that's
love
a little
driving
bit
that
of a little bit of a unique, I mean, the Bullet, the Boss
the Bullet,
302,
the Boss,
like
yeah.
those had that kind of specialness. So maybe the Dark Horse, but then again, the cool thing about a Boss 302 was like, it was, you could daily drive that thing.
Yep. And it was also a
And
callback
then-
to the old Boss,
Yeah,
so
and
there
then
was
you
that double
take it to
vintage
the,
again.
Yeah, and you take it to the track and it was like, oh, wow. Whereas this one, anybody who's driven one on the street goes, oh, man, it's a chore.
yeah.
right? Going back to shout out Craig Cole with the WRX STI, still to this day, if you talk to him about it, he's like, it drives like a tractor.
Yep.
But
he's also a Mustang owner.
when you're on a track, the STI,
It
when
all
you're
makes sense.
exactly. So, and then this is the last one that was your addition.
No, you said this one. So you
Did I say
mentioned the
this?
Toyota Land Cruiser as a future classic. And I kind of agreed because it looks sick. And I think
Yeah.
like it has a certain timelessness and a certain coolness
Yeah.
that is timeless. Like it transcends time.
I just also think I was just looking at it from a look at the 4Runner, right? The Toyota, not necessarily the most recent version, but like even if you look at like a 97 4Runner has this certain quality to it
Yep.
that it's like, oh man, people lust after it. You go out to BC and people are driving these things with 400,000
Yep.
kilometers on them.
And that's what I think you were right to mention this because, a lot of the times we talk about performance as a factor that drives classic car status.
Yeah.
But Toyota stuff, it's the reliability that makes
Yeah.
them so desirable.
Yeah.
And I know, reliability isn't typically a very sexy thing to talk about, but when you're talking about classic cars, the fewer headaches, the better. And
Yeah.
a Toyota will do that for you.
Yeah, and I just thought again, the other one to look at as sort of like the if it's a bit of an indicator, yes, it was different. It was more, kind of special because it was very specialized, but the Toyota FJ Cruiser, which was a limited run.
Yep.
So I kind of look at this and go, well, we don't know for sure, but if Toyota is going to, cap
Yep.
this to 5 years, 6 years, whatever, then that will also help. And Toyota's not going to sell as many of these as it did 4Runners and as it probably will this current
Right,
4Runner
right.
that's on its
Because
way.
I think it's a lot more purpose built, right? And then look at FJ prices now. They're
Yeah.
sky high,
Yeah.
right? And so that's going to happen with this too, 20 years down the road.
Or another one that you could say was kind of like, a example for this to follow is the Nissan Xterra.
Oh, yeah.
Not quite the same collectability as an FJ Cruiser. It was very everyday drivable.
But the reliability.
Reliable and super capable
Yep.
off-road, and that was the appeal of it, and that's why people still lust. You can still go online and find people that pine for the Xterra.
Oh, I think so too, because especially that era, there's like a certain nostalgia, right? And so that makes total sense to me. But also the current Land Cruiser has a very already retro style, and I think it'll just age so well.
Oh my God, guys, Jody and this double retro thing.
I love it.
You do. Double vintage,
Double vintage.
That's going to be the name of your next vintage shop.
Double vintage.
Double vintage. You're just selling things that are vintage on vintage.
Vintage on vintage. Before we get to our Ask an Expert segment, here's a message from your friends at AutoTrader. Having trouble finding your perfect car at the perfect price? The answer is AutoTrader. Car prices are dropping across Canada, and AutoTrader has hundreds of thousands of new and used cars to choose from. Get a great deal on your perfect car by visiting AutoTrader today. This week's Ask an Expert comes from our buddy Maroon. Welcome back, Maroon, loyal supporter of the show. Hi, Jody and Dan. I hope this message finds you well. It's been a while since my last inquiry. I've been on a recent vacation and I had last-minute commitments. During my travels, I took you along virtually to Punta Cana.
Oh, nice.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, my wife's Subaru Outback was stolen on Friday, July 12th.
No!
That sucks. I'm so sorry.
Oh, man.
Consequently, we're now in the market for a second-hand car. Given Montreal's challenging winters, we are inclined towards an all-wheel drive model. Considering that her daily mileage is under 30 kilometers, an electric vehicle doesn't seem practical for us at this time. Therefore, we're specifically interested in a used all-wheel drive sedan. Could you kindly recommend suitable options that meets our requirements? Thank you in advance for your assistance, and I eagerly await your response.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry about the car being stolen. I know that's, a big issue in this country. That's also, I'll be honest with you, I am a little bit shocked, like the Outback of all.
Yeah, you hear about like Lexuses and stuff getting jacked.
Is it Lexuses?
Lexi?
Lexi. I don't know. Well, you know what? Okay, I'm sorry. This was not stolen for like resale the way these, because it was a 2013 Outback. Like that's not a car that somebody's stealing
not a hot ticket item.
Yeah, to throw in a shipping container. It's still unfortunate. That's a bummer. An all-wheel drive sedan.
Used all-wheel drive sedan.
I mean, you could just, stick with the tried and true and go with a Legacy.
Legacy, if that's what, if your wife is used to a Subaru thing. I love the Legacy. It's very practical, very easy.
And this wouldn't be, so this might kind of bridge the gap between, the whole, like, I'm thinking affordability wise in terms of use. It's a little smaller, so it doesn't quite hit the mark of the Legacy. It's also a little bit newer, but that might help with the pricing because it's a compact car instead of a midsize. A Corolla hybrid with all-wheel drive, which has been available for the last couple of years, so you could scoop up one coming off like a 2-year lease that you might be able to get for a decent price that won't burn a lot of gas, that can handle that 30K commute.
Super reliable.
Yeah. So that would be probably my recommendation, Legacy or Corolla hybrid.
Both great picks. Thank you so much, Maroon, for your question. I hope the insurance payout was decent enough to get you something new. But if anyone else would like to ask us questions, you can email us at expert@trader.ca. But that wraps up this episode. Wow, 60 in the books. Thank you so much, everybody. Make sure to like and subscribe and all that jazz. And drive safe. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.